When budgets tighten and commercial pressures rise, quality is often expected to do more with less. But what happens when short-term financial targets begin to outweigh long-term quality goals? And how can leaders balance profitability, resilience, and operational excellence without sacrificing trust or performance? In this episode of Quality Impact, I'm joined by Carl Andrew, Chartered Management Consultant, Chartered Manager, and founder of Westwood Management Consulting. Together, we explore the often overlooked connection between financial strategy, governance, leadership, and quality performance. I'm your host, Rashad Isa, and you're joining me on Quality Impact, a podcast produced by the Chartered Quality Institute. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify and YouTube so you never miss an episode. But first, here's a quick message from our sponsors.
This episode of the Quality Impact podcast is proudly sponsored by Catalyst Consulting, specialists in Lean Six Sigma, operational excellence, and business transformation solutions. Catalyst Consulting helps organizations achieve lasting success.
600 quality professionals, one room, London this June. That's Quality Live, the CQI's annual conference. Here, leading quality thinkers address the topics that matter the most and build your professional network. For more information, go to qualitylive.org. Carl, welcome to Quality Impact.
Hi, Rashad. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a real honour and a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss the amazing issues and the questions around quality and finance. So thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. I cannot wait to dive in. So let's start with financial decisions. In your opinion, how do you feel or how do you believe that poor financial decisions eventually become quality problems inside organizations?
I think the biggest issue with poor quality of financial decision-making is that it masquerades as efficiency when it's actually prompted and driven by short-termism. And accountants and finance professionals usually have a blind spot. The P&L is the blind spot. It's line item driven, and therefore it's quite easy to cut budgets, but not fully understand the value chain, the end-to-end chain, and the systematic problems that not understanding that value chain creates. The other problem is that it creates a false impression of investment or return on investment. So, for example, it's like saving £50 on a car service only to find that 6 months later you've got a £200 bill for a problem with the engine. The other issue with short-termism and financial decision-making is that it starves the culture. It impacts the culture. It impacts values, and certainly the employees of an organization will tend to find that the values of the organization are compromised, and therefore it's very difficult to then start to add value to the customer or the client at the client-facing intersection of the organization.
Short-termism, I like this term because it really brings it all back to say, if we're only focusing on that next month or that next quarter, we are really operating like this, very close to our nose. We're not seeing the full picture, and lots of financial decisions should really support organizations, as you said, the value chain end to end with customer at the heart of it, because they're the ones that will keep us sustained.
It is indeed. And therein lies the problem. I think the issue with certainly Western economies is the capitalism, the short-termism, the return on shareholder investment is driving business decisions. And it's always that CFO, not on my watch do I want a fall in profits and therefore, a loss of prestige or even worse, a loss of position. So we do need to sort of recalibrate the way we judge companies' performance and start looking at the long-term investment.
Why should quality leaders then pay closer attention to financial strategy and the commercial decision-making process in a business?
Essentially, it's like most things in business. Finance and quality need to be in sync and have a partnership and an understanding of each other's positions. So what I would say from a finance point of view is that quality professionals need to come to the table, as do finance professionals, but quality professionals in particular need to present business cases away from just pure compliance and ISO audits, for instance, and start to sort of translate quality problems and quality initiatives as investment cases. And for me, particularly, it's quantifying inaction. So what do I mean by quantifying inaction? So we know the cost of activities, but very rarely do we know the cost of not doing something. So the quantification of inaction. And I guess to just place this into context from my own personal experience, I believe all organizations should be learning organizations. So quality is rightly placed to observe points of failure in an organization. And for me, a point of failure in an organization is not a negative. It is a positive. It is a place where we can start to improve systemically. So therefore, from a quality perspective, someone working in the quality profession needs to come to the finance and understand the cost of inactivity, the cost of inaction. On the other flip side, they also need to understand that actually to add value to the customer, the business needs to be in business. Therefore, they need to have a good understanding of the balance sheet, the robustness of the company's finances. It's a two-way partnership.
And certainly we've seen it. We've seen a big of shift in also when you talk about, the starting point for organizations to be compliant, whether they're compliant with ISO standards or with any other regulatory bit, there is always that risk-based approach. So professionals are always asked to balance their decisions into their operating model using a risk-based approach. And that is what I heard you say about, as quality leaders, you need to bring to the table the cost of inaction, but you also need to understand the P&L because we have to be in business to be able to invest in the future. So it's a two-way partnership.
It's the organizations that will survive today are the organizations that learn continuously and turn failures into points of opportunity.
I like that learning organizations and their necessity to continue to survive, and that will determine also the culture in an organization. And you've worked with so many different organizations. From your experience, what happened to an organizational culture when short-term financial targets start outweighing long-term quality goals?
Certainly what happens is that corporate values are the first victim. It's always a victim of short-termism. Again, corporate values and the integrity of the organization suffers. It's the drip, drip, drip effect of these poor decisions, poor financial decisions that start to erode a corporate culture. And then what happens is essentially what I've seen is that employees start to switch off. They start to cut corners. Quality issues arise. And then the finger of suspicion is pointed towards quality rather than the source of the decision making, which is usually a financial decision taken on short-term sort of basis. It's a shame because there's an opportunity there because quality failures, as I said, are there as an opportunity to improve systems. So therefore there's another opportunity, another learning opportunity that's being missed. And again, that's what happens. Employees start to miss things. They start to miss opportunities. I've seen this several times in organizations I've worked in where the culture starts to suffer primarily because of not necessarily one big decision, but it's the drip, 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 continuous culmination of poor decision making.
We've seen this. We've seen that erosion of culture. And the most dangerous thing that an organization can get to is when they get to a point where people stop flagging errors, failures, or mistakes. So not even shy behind it or, mention it in they completely say they have no more trust in it because that decision that was loud yesterday or the week before or the month before overshadowed that value and slowly it starts to erode it. And we've seen so many stories in our society and in international societies where that sort of going quiet on a failure has in some instances costed lives as well.
Indeed.
It is a two-way partnership. It is a two-way relationship. And we do recognize that failures will always happen in every system. So it's inevitable as such. So how can leaders reduce costs without damaging that quality, that trust, or that organizational performance?
Cost leadership. I don't look at this through cost control or cost reduction, because that has negative connotations, particularly throughout the rest of the organization. To feel that you are being controlled by finance doesn't set those parameters for a very encouraging or effective partnership or growing partnership. So I come from this from a strategic lens, and I come from this from a positive angle. So I like to look at it as a strategic cost leadership exercise, where from a finance point of view, we need to leverage the collective intelligence of the whole organization. Finance don't have copyright over decisions, nor do they have copyright over actually intelligence throughout the organization. They hold a lot of data, but actually, if you want to know what's going on, the old adage is true. You walk about the organization, and it's those that are closest to the customer usually know where the problems lie and effective solutions lie. So it's about targeting waste. It is about targeting value add. And the question I always ask, whatever you're doing, does this step add value to the customer or end user? So throughout the organization, it's looking at that end-to-end process. All those processes within an organization, do they add value to an internal customer? Do they add value to the final customer? If they don't, ask the question, well, why are we doing it? And it's very often there that actually costs can be eliminated, waste can be reduced. And this is where you use the creativity of the staff and the employees. They are the greatest asset of any organization. It's an opportunity for cost reinvention, I like to call it. And very often, this is where concepts like activity-based costing and zero-based budgeting allow you to look at your processes and actually reinvent them. Use the creativity within your organizations to look at systems and processes differently. And if quality isn't embedded in those processes, it is an opportunity to just do that.
So if we look into the role of governance, that sort of basically the role that governance play in both balancing profitability with sustainable quality outcomes, what can we do as you said? Because I like the fact that you said collective intelligence and, chief financial officers or the financial team don't have that copyright over decisions in an organization. So governance does play a role. And to what extent can we push that role so as we do that balancing between profitability and the sustainable quality outcomes?
I liken governance to the brakes on a Formula One car. They aren't there to make you go slow. They are there to ensure that you can corner at 200 miles an hour, essentially. So that's the way I see governance. Governance protects the organization. Governance is there to manage risk, to be able to protect the culture of an organization. But it can be used, as I said, with the analogy of Formula One car. Actually, it's there to enable. And again, as part of the culture, that message needs to be disseminated throughout the organization, that actually governance, good governance, rules and regulations that can be seen as barriers are not. They need to be enablers, and organizations need to, I guess, think about how they message governance and the narrative around the governance rules to ensure that it becomes an enabler throughout an organization rather than a sort of barrier.
I like that analogy, and I like that you mentioned governance being an enabler. And one of the criteria that it's enabling is psychological safety. And if governance is taken as a tick box exercise or have bias towards only one metric in an organization, I could see how that will cascade down to every other interaction down the chain, the value chain of employees and of your operating model. So that brings me then to the question of, why do some organizations only recognize the value of quality after a financial or an operational failure? I know personally, we've started to see a lot of organizations that are embedding quality at the start, quality by design. They're focusing on customer, both external customer and the internal employee. So that shift had started, but we still believe that there are a lot of organizations that only call onto that quality framework or that quality professional only after a failure. In your experience, why do you think that's so?
In my experience, it's because predominantly financials are a lagging indicator. So financial professionals spend a lot of time, we're looking backwards. Things are going well. An organization from a financial point of view can think everything's working perfectly. It's efficient. There's nothing to really worry about. The processes and systems are working, but it's a lagging indicator. We're looking backwards. We're looking at historical information. Decisions that we're taking now affect the quality and the customer experience in the future. So this is where we need to start getting smarter in organizations. And having worked in the energy sector in a safety critical industry, we concentrated on health and safety, which was near misses. How many near misses are we seeing? Because if you capture those, you then start to understand the probability and the propensity to have major safety issues. Again, we're looking at the cost of inaction, of not doing things, of cutting budgets, of saying, actually, we can become more efficient if we reduce X, staff training. But as I say, financials are lagging indicators. So what I've seen in my experience is if we take this decision now, what implications does that have through the value chain? Understand the value chain. What effects will it have in 6, 8, 12 months' time? A good example of this was back in the 1990s. I do read a lot of case histories, and Marks and Spencer's at the height of their successes back in the early 90s started to cut staff training. That wasn't seen immediately. It only came to the fore 12, 18 months later when, staff had left, key staff members had left, and quality of service started to reduce.
That's very reassuring to know that we can actually work with reviewing the cost of implication of a decision. That is foresighting. That's when we say, we always talk about quality by design. We talk about getting it right first time, and what that look like for something that's being developed and will hit the market 6 months down the line. And it's the same thing of when we do a financial decision. What I heard you say, it's the same, should abide by the same principles. Don't look at the effect today, what's going to happen on the P&L today, but just also consider additional metrics of what would that look like on your operating model 6 months down the line if that decision was taken. So what leadership behaviors create resilient organizations during periodic of economic pressure and uncertainty? And the reason why I'm interested in this is in Arabic, we have a saying that basically translates life is like a wheel. So what goes up comes down, and it then goes up and then goes down. It's never a straight line. So the understanding is organizations will experience not just an upward trajectory, but an up and down performance as well. So knowing that at the start, what behaviors will make us resilient when that dip happens?
I'm an absolute disciple for authentic leadership. Now, what do I mean by authentic leadership? I mean leadership that is vulnerable, which might not be seen in some fields as appropriate management style. What I mean is that we live in a world, a VUCA world, so facing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. It's a liability if any leadership team thinks it knows all the answers, because we don't. And as leaders, authentic leaders, we need to message that across the organization. Look, we are facing real economic pressures at the moment. We all are. And I don't know if anybody has a crystal ball. I certainly don't. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So therefore, the way I approach this is that I see this as a learning opportunity, to innovate, to stick to our values, our corporate values, and to protect, most importantly, the end-to-end value chain, because that is what's going to make the organization a success, a sustained success. So it is about having authentic leadership and also not being afraid. So another analogy, buffaloes, believe it or not, if there's a storm coming, unlike any other animal, other animals run away from the storm. The herd of buffalo run towards the storm, through it, and out the other end. They're not fearful of taking those hard decisions. No, are they fearful of hard times? They've got the resilience to endure. They face the storm and go through it, and they go through it quicker.
If you can, be a buffalo. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember that. Carl, to wrap up, I have one more question, but we're going to take it in two parts. So that's for senior leadership organizations, boards, and for quality leaders as well. So let's start with boards. How can boards and executive leaderships better connect financial performance with the quality performance? I know you touched base on it earlier with variety of metrics, but can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Good sporting teams, football teams, rugby teams, shouldn't and don't often look at the scoreboard. And what do I mean by that? Performance is everything. So the P&L, the balance sheet, is a measure, but it doesn't cause success. It isn't the driver of success. It's just the measure of success. So it's coming back to my point about lagging and leading indicators. We need, certainly within the boardrooms, to have that balanced scorecard to understand what actually drives the value, what drives the customer experience. Was our performance in line with what we expected our standards of play? Now, whether we win or not is a different question. The first thing to address is the performance. So it's understanding the performance. What drives the performance of the business? Get that right, and the lagging indicator of finance and the numbers will follow. So don't look at the scoreboard, look at the processes. What is making you successful? What is driving the customer experience? What is driving that end-to-end value chain?
That will help feed into the culture of the organization, provide the psychological safety, and then we become into that continuous circle. I love that. So I'm going to now flip the coin and go back to quality leaders. So as a quality leader, what should I start doing now to secure buy-in from CFOs and be able to deliver that operational excellence?
Quality professionals need to step away from the concept that the quality is all about compliance. Quality is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to improve, to excel, have a great partnership, understand each other's positions, understand the monthly numbers when they come through, understand what's happening. But actually, where quality professionals can really excel is to think of themselves as basically venture capitalists. When they seek funding from the CFO for projects, for quality initiatives, think of themselves going on Dragon's Den. So what do the dragons care about? Well, dragons care about, whether they want to know the margin, they want to know the systemic risks, because being in business is all about managing risks. They also want to know how quickly they can get the capital back. So my advice to quality professionals is choose a Trojan horse, choose a project, because in these times of tight cash, tight profit margins, to ask for millions is always going to be difficult. Start small. Start to understand projects that have a good return on investment, that have a good prospect of success, on which you then can build. Because again, it's about building trust. But that would be my suggestion. And then what that does is it actually then re-educates or educates the finance professionals within the organization to understand actually quality. There is a real opportunity here to build real value in the business. We've got a credible return on investment that will then hopefully drive a more sort of culture focused organization.
That is absolutely brilliant, Carl. What I heard a lot stand out throughout all of this conversation is if we really want to build that relationship, we have to start speaking that strategic financial language that some of the brilliant CFOs and financial teams speak. And that will enable us to open that exchange and start driving that culture holistically, not just from a P&L standpoint or from a single fixing a quality failure, but to drive that in the organization as a whole. Quality is not compliance. Quality is powering performance. Thank you so much, Carl Andrew, for joining our episode today. Thanks to our producer, Luke Nixon. I've been your host, Rashad Issa. See you next month.